It's very good to see you all here, and thanks very much for coming along to our panel. And today we're going to be looking at using, choosing and clearing music. The big one, music. It's the language of films and documentaries. It tells you what to think. It sets the mood. Imagine the shower scene from Psycho without the music. It's just somebody having a good wash. Or the Jaws scene on the sea, in the sea next to the beach. It's just somebody having a nice day out at the beach with a bit of action in the sea. Or in Space Odyssey, it's that one unforgettable track that conjures up the isolation of outer space and the human condition. So to unravel, discuss, conjugate, and digest the importance of music to you as filmmakers, we've got some brilliant people on our panel today. Thank you very much for coming along, guys. They're at the cutting edge of documentary making, and we're really, really pleased to have them here today. At the end of our discussion, we're going to have a Q&A session. I'd like you all to be having to think about your favourite and most iconic memory of music used in film, what that might be and why you love it so much. So have a little think about that, and I'll ask you in the Q&A session for some of your examples. And on your way out, Audio Network has created the Bible, answering all of the questions you might ever have on how to clear music, what you need to do when clearing a piece of music for filmmaking. So please remember to take a copy of that on your way out. So let's get started. Lindsay Dryden is a director and producer from the UK. She's a background in broadcast docs for Channel 4, BBC, History Channel, S4C, and many others. She's directed films for the Royal Court Theatre, Media Trust, the Community Channel, and Hungarian Public TV. Lost and Sound is her recent award-winning feature documentary about music, deafness, and its relationship with the brain. It world premiered at South by Southwest 2012, British premiered at Sheffield, and has been shown at festivals on 5 continents. It was winner of the Special Jury Award, the Dorf Music Documentary Festival, Croatia, and Lindsay has been nominated for a myriad of many other awards in her own right. So let's take a look at some of Lindsay's films.
For me, inside my head, music has always been three-dimensional. It's had an architecture. And if you lose an ear, that goes. Music becomes completely flat. And the difference is akin to the difference between an architectural drawing and an actual piece of architecture. Beforehand, I would listen to buildings. Now I listen to an architectural drawing. I can see what the drawing is attempting to express, but I don't get the volume. Now music is simply a flat drawing on a single plane. I'm keen, no, not keen, I'm absolutely desperate to find out what happens next.
What are you going to do with the microphone?
When things are difficult, I feel kind of stressed, and sometimes I feel upset about stuff, like issues at school. There was quite a lot of bullying.
To talk about it is really difficult sometimes, so sometimes drawing pictures or writing down, they can express themselves and then rub away the worries because they disappear then, which is really useful.
So
Now it's time to relax.
So you choose.
I lie on the water bit.
And just relax.
Feels like I'm relaxing in the middle of the ocean.
Philip Sheppard is a highly talented and accomplished composer, specialising in film and television soundtracks. He's also a solo cellist and a professor of the Royal Academy of Music. Recent films that he's provided the music for and composed the music for include In the Shadow of the Moon, which won numerous awards, including the World Documentary Prize at Sundance, Henry, Mind of a Tyrant, for David Starkey's landmark Channel 4 series and forthcoming feature film Sergio. Philip has worked with numerous artists, ranging from Sylvie Gwilym, David Bowie, Jarvis Cocker, through to Jamelia, Oasis, and Suzanne Vega. Quite a who's who. Let's hear some examples of Philip's music.
That nation reflected Henry's own character. A bit of it survives, and to the extent that it does, we're all still made in Henry's image.
That's how it's done. That's how it's done. Glynn Middleton is a founder and the creative director at True North Production, based in Leeds. And Glynn's TV career started on the prestigious First Tuesday documentary series. Glynn produced and directed numerous high-profile films for ITV, including The Unknown Victims of the Yorkshire Ripper, I'll Be Watching You, as well as Dirty Money and The Execution of Cocaine Chadi for Channel 4. Glynn's executive producer credits for True North include John Venables, What Went Wrong, Churchill's German Army, Killer Couples, Killer in the Family. Glynn, there's a bit of a theme developing here, but no, it's okay. He also did youth hosteling the first 100 years. Here's a taste of Glynn's work.
We're back! I'm going back to Cardiff looking hotter than ever.
All it's going to be is chidge, chidge, chidge.
I'm gonna go crazy psycho nuts.
This party girl is going from amateur to professional. We're bringing Valley's glamour back. We're gonna have to live in more.
It's going to be amazing.
Oh my God.
Slow, dedicated process, and it will call for the help of neighbors, friends, and family to make it through. After the aftermath of this tornado is that we will get through this disaster. We'll get through it together.
This is unbelievable. I don't even know what my first thoughts were, to be honest. I just can't believe. I can't. No.
This is Arthur Hutchinson, the man guilty of a wedding day massacre.
To wipe out one family is an indication of just how dangerous this man is. It didn't matter who got in his way because they would destroy them if they were in his way.
He used to rape me. That was terrified.
They call some people animals, but animals are not like that. You know, I mean, no, he was inhuman.
The extremes of documentary making. So now we're going to start our discussion, guys. And I think the first question I'd like to ask is to you, Glynn. As a producer and director, how soon in the production process do you start thinking about what music you're going to use?
I think it's immediately. I'm also a director of True North as well as a PD. And it's very important for us that we establish immediately what we want to do with music. That's partly because it has to go into the budget, and you're immediately trying to work out what have I got money to do. I've got a set amount of money from Channel 4 or from Nat Geo. How do I use it? And if I want £2,000 or whatever to find a composer who's going to make that program special for me, what do I lose as a result of that? Do I lose a certain number of filming days? Do I have a bit less time in the edit or whatever? And also because at that early stage, we're already thinking about international clearances. And we've had plenty of examples where we have had to either remove music from the British versions or we have to find the money for them. We had a notable example of that in a program we made called My Fake Baby, which is much more sensitive than you think. But it ended up that the producer, and it usually is producer choice in these things, had some clips from Carter Burwell, who had put them into the production. If you don't know Carter Burwell, quite a famous Hollywood composer, Seven Psychopaths, all kinds of soundtracks that have been composed for. And I think it cost me about £2,500 for 20 seconds to be able to clear that. And I wanted to keep it in, but it just meant saying to the producer, okay, well, we're going to keep that in, but you have to lose something as a result, and I'll have to take that out for the international version. So it's really important, absolutely at the outset. If you're filming, it's almost too late at that stage. If you're in the edit, I think it's definitely too late at that stage. I think it's thinking about it straight away.
It sounds like a very controlled process, and I think some of the stories that people have to tell about when it can go wrong, you learn from those, and obviously it's something that you think about early. But Lindsay, you've had experience in this area. What's your advice, or what's your approach when you're making a film? When do you start thinking about your music choices?
I tend to start thinking about it right at the beginning, as much because it's a part of the storytelling process. So if I'm developing or writing something, I want to be listening to what might be shaping that scene, what might be shaping the edit when we eventually get to it. And I think these things work better if I direct and produce differently on different projects, and I think it works better if you have a separate producer, because in my director and producer head, I go, yeah, of course we're going to use that Mozart, that Beethoven, that Prokofiev, that Schumann, that expensive stuff. And then my producer goes, really? Really? Can we afford that? And so I think it's something that I'm always listening to from the very beginning, but it really helps to have a producer's controlling hand, making sure that you know what you can afford. So with Lost in Sound, we had to drop a piece of Coltrane that we were able to use in the festival version, but, you know, we're talking £10,000 to use the damn thing on an international version, and it just wasn't possible. So we composed a piece of music separately for that, and we're able to keep in Beethoven, Mozart, and other things as a result.
So I suppose the message from that is it's about maintaining flexibility, but still being true to the creative core of the film. Yeah. So, Philip, from a composer's perspective, when's the best time to be brought into a project?
I think either right at the beginning, so ideally at a script stage, certainly before it's got near an edit, or right at the last moment. And the reason for that is when you're brought in the middle, there's a lot of time for things to change. There's a lot of decisions that sometimes are made for the wrong reasons. It might sound counterintuitive to say come in at the last moment, but actually it means everyone's very focused. And if a piece of music is working up to 90%, you can also then have the courage to say to the producer, it's not good enough, I'll just do another one, rather than trying to polish something that's not 100% there. Also, very selfishly, the advantage when you start writing music on a project that hasn't even been cut together at all yet is that then the editor might start cutting to you. And hey, you sound so much better when people are editing to you rather than when you're trying to hit the picture. So that's purely selfish.
Didn't you tell me before we started that you had a film you actually composed, never, ever at any point seen the pictures?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but yes. I had a film at Sundance this January, which I still haven't seen because I didn't manage to go over, but it was sort of the real version of Zero Dark 30 called Manhunt, about the hunt for bin Laden, but more about the CIA operatives who were really people like us, apart from the fact they were doing this extraordinary job. They were taking the kids to school, making their packed lunches, and then having to hunt one of the most dangerous men in the world. And consequently, it was quite difficult because I don't like working in America because my family are here. They couldn't send the film over to me. So what I did have was an extraordinarily good editor who'd write me such detailed notes, frame by frame, about what he needed, that actually it was far better for me not to see the film once we were a certain way down the line. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I know I think there's too much music in it and it'll be terrible. But yeah, I have worked blind. Yeah.
Again, flexibility seems something that's going to be rather important in your craft.
Yeah.
I think an interesting point for us to explore is how producers and directors choose the type of music they're going to use, whether it's commercial music, whether it's going to be specially composed music, or whether it's going to be library music. And does budget actually affect this? Lindsay, what's your experience of this, and what's your approach?
I think it obviously depends hugely on the film, and the films I tend to work on tend to be either around arts or quite sensitive human stories, or often the kind of combination of the two. And my favourite sort of combination is some composed music and some sort of iconic existing music. So with Lost in Sound, it's a film about music and how incredible it is and how it affects people. And so we had to use pieces of music that people would already know so that we could mess with them. We used this amazing piece of simulation software from Cambridge University. It's kind of the closest that anybody's ever come to being able to play music through somebody else's ears. So you take the data from somebody's hearing test, you put it into the simulation, you output some music and you can hear it. Obviously you're hearing it through your own ears, so there's always that issue, but we wanted to be able to change pieces of music that you already recognise, really big, well-known pieces. So we had to use some big stuff in that situation. But we also had a composer who wrote the score, and he was able to create some really special sequences that also kind of put you in the perspective of these people whose hearing had changed. And I've used library music on some productions, and the advantage of that, I think, is that I think everybody wants to choose pieces of library music that don't feel like they come from a library. That's a real issue. But the great thing about it is that you can listen to it as you're in pre-production. You can find how you're going to tell your audio story without having to instruct a composer. You get to just listen and pick what you want, which is really helpful.
And I guess these days it probably helps that libraries produce stings and versions and stems of those main tracks, so you can actually get that slightly more tailor-made feel to a library track.
Although I've never used a sting, I have to say. I've never used a sting.
Plenty in the Audio Network catalogue. Sorry.
Thanks for that.
Glynn, is your approach the same? Or I'm guessing because you've got so many, looking at your show, such a wide variety of different types of production, does it depend on the type of production?
It depends on the broadcaster.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't create a program that was being made for Nat Geo and make it very kind of gentle and slow and female skewing. You know what they want, and from the outset you say, here's the style I want, here's the tone, here's the pace that I want it for. Because we're creatives, I think sometimes we think we know best about these things and we'll deliver them what they bloody well need. But actually you do have to listen to them. They're stumping up the money to do it. And so we listen very carefully to them. Sometimes they're very specific. We made a history series called Bloody Tales for Nat Geo recently, and it was very noisy and pompous and very fast, and it reflected the fast-cut nature of the series. That's what they wanted. They wanted it to be kind of bite-sized history that moved along like an express train, and the music reflected that. There's a series that's starting tonight on Channel 4 called Compare Your Life that we've just made, and that's completely different, and it's quite gentle, it's quite reflective, but music builds to different places. We've composed the title music for that, and we've composed the stings for that. We do use stings. We've not. But the rest is library, and it's about finding the right thing. So it's very much about establishing at the outset what the broadcaster wants, the tone and the pace and the nature of the film, what they want to achieve, and then we'll work within that.
And have you had to change music for particular markets if you're producing? Because I know you produce a lot in the US.
Yeah.
Do you find there's a different imperative there?
Certainly for international clearances, it's interesting. We make a CBBC series called Junior Vets and Dick and Dom Go Wild, and we can't. BBC Three and CBBC are among the channels who will say we would like, and MTV there, we would like lots of commercial music on it. But when they've got an appeal abroad and we want to market them abroad, we have to strip those out. And sometimes that's about finding music that kind of matches. Sometimes it's about music that doesn't quite match but has the same kind of feel anyway. So we're always looking at the Carter Burwell clip. My Fake Baby is our best-selling documentary, including a sale to Vatican TV, which is very, very, which is fantastic.
Did you have to change the music for that sale?
We did have to. We changed Carter Burwell because £2,500 for 20 seconds was for UK only. So we did have to choose that, and we do that a lot. But where we know early enough, another good reason for making those choices early is that you can absorb those into the budget if that's what you want. If that's fantastically important to you, then some of this material is cut to shots, and quite often you can't then unpick it easily. It's impossible to find music that would then cut exactly to it. So yeah, it's as early as possible, and we're always changing for international. We did a crime series with Donald McIntyre. Called I can't remember what it was called, but it was the music was "I Fought the Law" by The Clash, and of course that had to go for the international version, and yet it was very much the theme of the series. So it was you change it all the time.
And not finding yourself in the position where the cost of the music outweighs the business objective of making a profit when you're selling it commercially globally. So it's that fine line that's cropping up again. Philippa, do you have any thoughts on commercial, library, specially composed music from the creative angle?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things to say about that. Firstly, I'm immensely grateful for ever having got involved with production music, because that was the first kind of commission per se that I had, and out of doing that, I found that a director had tempted to film with production music of mine, and then they called me and said, well, you might as well write it. Actually, he's here, David Sington, who made In the Shadow of the Moon. That was my first film, and if I hadn't done production music, I wouldn't be living my dream, which is writing film music. On the other question of, I suppose, where film music is different from commissioned production music, film music often, in the work I do, which is very largely documentary, is often having to create a kind of either a frame upon which you're projecting and not telling people what to feel necessarily. Sometimes it's a varnish to kind of join rostrum work up to sort of A and B roll and all sorts of things where you're having to kind of hold sequences together. When you do production music, often it's way more structured, funnily enough. It doesn't necessarily have an open ending. It might build to an end point. It might be... I mean, the one thing I'm asked for most often is music that builds. And I think it's often a requirement of documentary to create a progression, and music can sometimes be the engine for that. Having said that, a lot of my favourite documentaries use very little music, so, which is it's probably just a personal thing that being involved in it, I notice it. Yeah. I think in good documentary, you don't necessarily notice the music when it starts, but it becomes indispensable once it's there.
Very important for telling the story and developing, keeping it going. Glynn, question for you. How is it best to ensure that the music used matches the broadcaster's expectations? We've already touched on that a little bit. What do you do if it goes completely wrong?
What do you do if it's you will know pretty quickly if it's going wrong, because most of the broadcasters that we work with are seeing cuts of our programs relatively early. 5-10 years ago, it was more of a case of here's the program that I'm deigning to give you. Now hand it over and show it in all its glory. These days, there's far more control over that, and they see it early. When we work with Nat Geo, we have specific dates for viewings within there at halfway through the edit and 2/3 of the way through the edit. You will know fairly quickly if that's working, and we will know. We will know. But obviously, you know, programs change as well, and when the pictures change and when the sync changes, then the music obviously becomes as part of that as well. There have been occasions where we've torn up the music and started again. We've asked composers to come in at an extra cost and then said, this isn't working, the music that we're working or the composer that we're working is not working, we can't make that work, the marriage isn't working properly, can you come and help us? And that's tough, replacing someone else's music within it. We can tailor some library music to it. Libraries like Audio Network will always try to find alternatives to the music. You find a track that you think works, but it doesn't quite work, and something's not really quite shaping up. So you go to them and say, can you go back to the composer and see if there is a way in which we can alter this, amend this to make it work? I can send you the pictures. And usually it's in everyone's interest to do that and to make that work. We work with a small number of composers. We have our own music publishing company. And that means that we're trying to use our music and our composers wherever possible. But sometimes that just doesn't work. Sometimes the marriage doesn't work and it needs someone completely outside of that, and you need some fresh thought. There's always ways of unpicking it. The enemy that you've got is the amount of time in which to do it.
And also, from what you're saying, it's not necessarily an either-or situation, and having a palette of choices available to you seems to be the best place to be.
That's true, and as I say, on Compare Your Life tonight, you know, we couldn't really afford a whole suite of composed music, but we thought the titles were important, and we also wanted it to become a brand. It's a format, and we want it to become a brand to be used abroad. So we put the money that we did have into titles music, stings music, punctuation, so that brand can extend and be used abroad. And then the rest, you know, it's not, okay, you can fill it up with library, you're still incredibly careful about what that music is, but you feel as though you've touched the main points with it.
Lindsay, what in your mind happens if you have a project, the music is totally associated with the project, is embedded in the project, you can't change it. You've had experience of this, haven't you? How did you get round that?
There was a particular situation where the little girl in Lost and Sound, she was born with normal hearing, lost her hearing when she was 14 months old because of meningitis. Parents are both professional musicians. And so she spent sort of 10 years trying to get music back again. And we filmed with her at a time when she just happened to be learning particular pieces on the piano. And she was playing some Schumann, which was fantastic, out of copyright, that was wonderful. And she was playing some Prokofiev, not out of copyright, only just about 10, 11 years to go, I think. Right. Yeah.
And you're not going to sit and stop her at that moment just when she's
definitely not.
Performing
but also
her favourite piece of music.
But we also couldn't lose it. We couldn't not use it. It was this incredibly important sequence in the film that suddenly demonstrates that she uses music as a kind of narrative, and that's how she makes sense of it, even though she can't really hear it fully. So in that situation, we befriended the publisher, explained the nature of the film, engaged in very long-winded conversations.
Bunches of flowers, chocolates?
We didn't go quite that far,
okay.
but, you know, there's still time.
Yeah.
And we just had to, you know, convey what the film was trying to do and what we could afford. We made it on a tiny budget. And that was the most expensive piece in that production, actually.
Yeah.
Even though we used this incredible piece of Beethoven, Daniel Barenboim personally agreed that we could use it for kind of nothing because he loved the film, which was wonderful. The Prokofiev estate didn't have quite the same power as that one individual. So
you've got a big difference, I think, between a living entity and an estate.
Yeah.
I mean, look at T.S. Eliot. I mean, you've got you know, where you can say to a composer, look, this is a really good thing, or a performer, they can often say, absolutely have it. When you've got a committee of people, it's so different. Yeah, that's not surprising.
And it's also an interesting point to bear in mind when you are out filming, that if you have people performing impromptu performances, always make sure that what they're singing or performing is something that you can clear, or or that you have alternatives that you could use. But in your case, clearly,
yeah,
that
we
was
were kind of on
impossible.
location going, oh crap.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something that you realise is happening and you can't do anything about it.
Absolutely.
So you figure out a way.
So Philip, what's the most effective way for producers to work with composers to get the best out of them?
I think there's a few things. Make sure your communication is really honest, straight, direct, and you've got a system. Most of the people I work with tend to be in a different country through my choice. In as much as I don't live. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I don't live in America, and a lot of the work's there. If you establish from day one, and often I don't meet them at all, and that's fine. But if you've got an incredibly direct way of talking, that if somebody is worried about offending a composer, you're really going to waste a lot of time and money. And I think that's really something. Most composers they're like actors. Yes, they're all ego-ridden, nervous people, but that's not your problem. I think the other thing that's critically important is a lot of producers and directors I've worked with, and editors too, will be worried that they don't know musical terminology. Don't worry, that's brilliant. If you talk in terms of food or colour or theatre or vegetables, it's fine. I will quite often, and often I'll be sent a film that's in a sort of rough form, but it's got a temp track on it, which is good and very bad, because obviously by that point everyone's in love with the temp. We have temp love. That's another reason for getting your music into the edit as early as you can. And if you can say, look, rather than sending me a temp track, can you send me, say, 3 adjectives that describe what you're trying to achieve? Not what the music does already, but what do you want to achieve in that scene? So, for instance, with that film we're talking about in January, I had an editor who's literate enough, not musically literate, just literate enough to be able to say, here's what I think I want to feel at that point. I think there's an important point with music in documentary that and this is something that I sometimes will have an argument directly with people like Nat Geo with, that when you are an audience member and you're aware of a piece of music in a documentary which is real, and you sense that the music is telling you what to feel, that can dislocate you from your audience sometimes. I think in certainly with a European audience, and it's where sometimes it's different with an American audience. So I'm quite aware of the fact that quite often the music must act as a screen and a frame rather than necessarily than something that's manipulating. I think there is an argument for saying the music can start in such a way that it appears to be doing very little and just holding, and then you can sort of twist it. But once you become aware of it, you're in a dangerous position when you're telling a real story. Because if someone's sophisticated, remotely sophisticated, and they think, well, this music's sad, and I'm feeling sad, you might be courageous as a filmmaker. I've had this discussion with David, who's sitting there, take the music out. The silence is stronger. Actually, that person saying nothing is way stronger than a violin telling you what to feel. Sorry, it was a long answer. But
fascinating answer. I'm hanging on your every word. Glynn, I'm interested to know, how do you go about sourcing a composer, or your colleagues at True North?
We force them to use ours. No, not really.
But just say you're starting out, and where do you start in looking for a good composer?
It's tricky. We do genuinely try to have producer choice, and producer directors come from all over the place and have all kinds of experiences and different contacts, and they will often come with their favourite people who might be ideal or might not be ideal. It's obviously in our interest with our music publishing company to try to push them towards ours, but usually it's a matter of working out very early, is this something you want to do? Have you got your own favourite way of working? When someone is starting out and when a new director is in the edit, we can show them previous films. We can make available to them all kinds of work that's out there. One thing you are not short of in our industry are requests from composers. We must get them a large number every week. Of requests from composers of show reels, of discs, or of programs that they've worked on. They're very engaged in that and want to share their work with you. And I would love to be able to have the time to go through all those. We don't really. So you tend to go by word of mouth, like anything else. Where's the great history PD that we need? Well, have a look at this. It's on Showfolio. who's that director who worked with us last year? He worked with someone, get him on the phone. It's a lot of word of mouth, a lot of personal recommendation. And, you know, what we all should be doing in this industry is watching as much television as possible and film as possible. We should be looking out. I look at programs and I note down those names at the end when they're great, when they're outstanding, when they've done something that I couldn't have found anywhere else. And we have lists of those people who will share with everyone. So, you know, it's a mixture of those things, really.
Lindsay, how about you? How do you go about selecting a composer, or how would you advise people to start on that journey? Moving into the world of lovies and composers, because they sound quite scary.
It's true that you tend to get a lot of composers sending you their work all the time. And I have to say I don't often get the chance to listen to it either. I might even have a folder in my emails where I put them all and then I possibly don't do much with them. That's not good, is it?
Not what we do at Audio Network. We listen to every single piece of music that's submitted to us. But that's our job.
Yeah, and people kind of don't send you things on spec. They just send you... Yeah. I think it's, a lot about looking at what's already being made and listening and seeing what you love and what works. I know a lot of musicians, lots of my friends make music, so I will often start there. Yeah. And lots of them might be musicians and composers, sound recordists, so that can feed in quite nicely. But I think it's just about knowing what you want it to sound like, or having a few options and listening out for that and finding those people via credits. I don't tend to kind of search for composers online and listen randomly. There's just too much out there.
Yeah, it's overload.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds to me like word of mouth is something that's really good.
I mean, you know, I really like the music on The Bridge, the BBC 4 crime drama, and I actively sought out, you know, a couple of our favourite composers and said, not can you rip this off, obviously, but that feel.
Not recommended.
It's not recommended,
beep.
but that's you know, that kind of feel and tone is perfect. That kind of stripped down heartbeat music, you know, is perfect for some of the crime shows that we make. So you might want to be thinking about looking into this area and seeing what you can come up with, because they're perfect.
And collecting references like that so that you can kind of play somebody a palette of what it might sound like, what the feel and the tone might be.
So that leads nicely into my next question, which is, Glynn, how do you create a mood and manipulate music to create a mood?
Well, I think from the opening clip, I mean, my favourite clip there was the storm chase, a girl with a skin condition who goes chasing around after tornadoes for 2 weeks a year when she, you know, is physically able to. And that, for me, was a perfect bit of music because it was incredibly minimalist. You know, you won't see the context in there, but you've just seen the most, you know, the noisiest, most outrageous tornado tearing through Joplin. And, you know, Sam was shrieking, you know, partly out of excitement and partly out of terror at witnessing this tornado, and you cut really sharply through to just that very stripped down music that you know, you hardly notice, that is hardly there. And that contrast between what had gone and what you saw there is perfect for me. That's using music to enhance the mood. I think you're creating the mood. I think you're enhancing it. It's already there. That change has already been made visually. On the other hand, you know, I was quite proud of the music that was for Bloody Tales because it was so over the top. It was outrageous. It was kind of, you know, screeching from the rooftops music, in-your-face music that I thought matched exactly what Nat Geo had told us they wanted for the feel of it. So you've got both ends of it there, the outrageous, the noisy, the right in your face, and you've got the really stripped down and somewhere in between.
And was the history music, was that dramatic reconstructions?
A lot of it was, but yeah, some of the noisiest bits were the reconstruction, but actually some of it was the discovery of locations or new research or whatever that went along with it.
Yeah.
Same question to you, Philip.
Well, because I don't make films.
But more about how you create tension, how you create a mood, how you manipulate the music.
For me, I never really think about it actively. I just kind of do it. I know when it doesn't work, and that's often when I'm trying too hard to do something. I think for me, what's most interesting, and probably I think you've touched on that, is that it's the nature of amplifying a scene through I wouldn't even say music, actually through sound. And what interests me is the nature of the if you like the texture. Can I touch that sound? What's it feel like? Because the moment you do something that has that kind of breath and that dirt and that bow noise and the fingers in there, somehow it feels real. It's like all the grit and the hairs and the dirt in a Picasso picture. It's not. You couldn't do that in Illustrator or Photoshop. And I think also listeners get that too. That there's this move away from things being purely sample driven. You can't really do that now because it gives it a plastic kind of sheen. And I suppose what I always look for is the palette, and I think you mentioned that. Establish the palette of the sound first. What instruments, what voices, what's the room look like that this is all going to be played in? What's the rule? Is it going to be a violin, a clarinet, a laptop, a kitchen sink, some spoons and a bottle of water? Great. That's what we'll use to join the film together. That's often also a criticism I'd have, that sometimes you notice when a program is being bolted together out of different libraries or different sources, because the picture of the music is going from this to a vast soundstage to a narrow room to a club to whatever, when actually your frame, your setting for the music, for the action has stayed in the same place. So I think there's something to be thought about there, that even if you're drawing music from different sources, would it work on an album that you'd listen to? Would it work on a playlist? If so, great. You're probably in the right frame.
Do you have any thoughts about that, Lindsay?
I would say that I agree that it's not about manipulating so much as enhancing, because as soon as you feel, particularly with something that's real and sensitive and about real people's lives, as soon as you feel like you've got a dramatic shot tracking into their face and they're crying and you're putting music on to make it more sentimental, everybody can feel that, and it's too much. We had this beautiful piece of music that we wanted to use. My editor and I were about to put the sequence together. We cut the sequence without any sound, without any music at all. We put the music with it. I think it was a cinematic orchestra kind of thing, and it was very sweeping and gorgeous. And this very sensitive, sweet sequence about these parents dealing with something terrible that had happened to their child became completely overwhelming. And we were so pissed off because we loved the music and wanted to use it, but it was far too much. So I would say that, it's all about stripping it back and making sure that when you switch all your music off, your narrative is still driving forward and your emotions are still there, whatever you do with the music.
Less is more.
I would just add, I don't think you can make crap shots good with music. Yeah. I think you can make music help with any program that you've got. I don't think you can turn water into wine.
I think the same can be said about music. So before we go to our Q&As, guys, I'd like each of you to give us your favourite example, most memorable use of music in film or documentary, starting with you, Glynn.
Well, being an old softie, I still love the key moment in Cinema Paradiso, where all of the screen kisses are wheeled out. I think that music stayed with me from that moment.
So it's not all about death, and killer couples, killer.
That's just the professional.
And shagging in Wales.
Yeah.
That's good.
Shagging in Wales. Watch that.
Were you not concentrating on the show reels there at the beginning, Philip? How about you, Philip? What's your favourite?
I think I'm a bit of a softie as well. There's a scene in Atonement written by a friend of mine, Dario Marinelli, who's a genius, where it's probably one of the longest tracking shots in cinematic history, when it's going along the beach and then it comes across a bandstand and the soldiers are singing For Those in Peril on the Sea. It's the perfect example of diegetic and non-diegetic music wrapping together, and it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. That hymn makes me cry anyway, and then when you hear it perfectly set in and against the music and it just passes by and it's just there, it's like a car going by in the wire. It's the only piece of music in the film, and it's perfect for it, and it goes, and I love that. I think it's genius.
Lindsay.
Oh, sorry, one other thing. They shot that entire film having recorded the music first, and they shot with music on set. I'm not suggesting you do that in documentary, but it informs everything about the film.
There's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant idea. Any piece of music in Pedro Almodovar's films, I'm gone, sobbing. it's a bit lame. People know not to sit too close to me when we go to see his films. But in documentary, I'd say, actually quite contrary to what we've been talking about, in Sleep Furiously, an independent doc about Wales and this kind of dying, this beautiful landscape and this dying lifestyle that's all about elderly people and library buses and people making cakes and hanging out and not really doing very much. The director used Aphex Twin to soundtrack it. And it's gorgeous. You've got this weird juxtaposition, and it works so beautifully. So I'd say that's my favourite bit.
Similar to mine is American Werewolf in London, when he's turning into a werewolf and they're playing Herman Hermits. I See a Pale Moon Rising, which is a very jaunty little jocular tune, and he's going through this hideous physical experience, and I just absolutely love the irony of that piece of music. So out to you guys. Give me some examples of your favourite. Oh, hold on a minute. Sorry, I've been told, if you don't mind just waiting for the microphone, it's coming up behind you. Sorry, here you go.
I have a very loud voice. You've softened me quite considerably with this. I wonder whether you consider music and sound amplification or natural sound that can be incorporated or a continuum, and how that plays into the total score of your setting the course of an audience's experience with the film.
Who'd like to take that question? Glynn?
No, well, I mean, from our point of view, the Storm Chaser film that you saw before very much took the natural landscape, and we did try to put that in, merge that within the music, the impact, and that if you ever see that film, you'll see that there are kind of natural winds and sounds and sounds of buildings creaking or whatever that are built into that soundtrack. So that I think that helps the uniformity of the film if you can do that, certainly. Yeah.
I've found a lot of my work is crossing these days into sound design, actually, and it's lovely when there's that blurring, and luckily I've got some friends who are extremely good sound designers, and started sort of rubbing the line out between the two, because music's just organised or not noise, and I think if it's possible to and I do a lot of this now, I've got whole banks of instruments which are literally sampled from the kitchen or the garden, or bits of some builders were laying some tiles the other day and realised that is the best xylophone sound I've ever heard. Can I have that bit? Can you cut it a bit more like that? It's great, and it's this move back to the sort of organic. You can't, and where possible, I rip sound off from the rolls that I'm being sent, and even surreptitiously incorporate it in. Once you blur it, it means you can introduce music in without realising you're listening to music, and everyone wins, I think.
Sort of my favourite thing in the world, really. Having a chance to find a scene where the diegetic sound can become something musical is just the best thing ever. And it's one of those little moments of magic. It doesn't happen very often. And what I want to do more in future is just try and create those spaces, let those things happen on location, because it's so satisfying to watch, I think, when you realise, as a viewer, that something very organic's happened. I think that's gorgeous.
Any more questions or favourite films? It's okay.
Cool super practical here and very boring. But about prices, could you give us a general idea about composer library, or even, the case where I've got people who are making their own music, and how I could incorporate that and what I could propose to them, so it's a fair things. I don't know how to do that.
Can I, just to get the gist of your question, to reiterate your question?
Prices.
Your question is, what are the prices? Yeah. I'm probably quite well positioned to answer that question, so I'll have a go. Varies enormously. Really, the best place to start is what budget do you have? So you need to know how much money you've got to spend on music in your film. If you're going to employ Philip as your composer, it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than somebody who's had very little experience and has their own studio in their bedroom. You have to consider where you're distributing the program. So if you're going to use a Madonna track in your film, that will cost a certain amount of money that will be quoted to you by the publishing company. But if you then transmit that abroad, or you distribute it anywhere else around the world, you might not get clearance, and you'll also have to pay a lot more money for it. So actually, the answer is, with each thing, it can vary a lot. If you're using library music or production music, the fees are always much lower because it's a pre-recorded collection of music. So it's much easier to budget and predict in that way.
How or where do you find the information then?
Talk to people.
Read our guide that we're going to hand out at the end of the session. It will tell you all of the different places that you need to go to. The other thing you can do is you can ring Audio Network, our company, and most of the people who work there will be able to guide you in the right direction, whatever kind of music you're using, not if it's just Audio Network.
Glynn, do you tend to work with sort of proportions of budgets? Do you have a proportion that tends to work that you would allocate to music, or is it different on every production?
Not in a clear sense like that. It's you know, the budgets just vary enormously. I mean, you know, here is a tariff. You have got £170,000 to make this programme, or you know, you have got £35,000 to make this programme. Make this what you want. Well, that gives me 3 weeks research and 3 weeks editing and not much else, so I'm not going to have money for music there. You know, that is definitely going to be library music. At the far end of it, well, yes, £170,000 an hour, that's definitely one where I feel as I can set, you know, a couple of £1,000 aside for a composer. But what will that buy me? It might not buy me a full soundtrack for the entire programme. It might buy me parts of that. Will that be worldwide clearance? Yes, I would hope so at that price. But everything is you know, on its own merits. And you know, some people might prefer to have an extra week in the edit and work with library music, or an extra 5 days filming, rather than have the luxury of a composer. So it's all, you know, a huge balance as to what you want, unless the broadcaster says, I insist that you have this, and then you have to build it in.
There are also things you can do when you are talking to composers and you say, I haven't got any money at all. And it does happen. I mean, you know, we're all living under, you know, more difficult times. And what I would encourage everyone to do is not to be shy about approaching people, whether they're performing musicians or whether they're established composers. I'm not talking about me, sorry, it sounds like a pitch and it isn't. Because there's always ways of doing things. For instance, generally, I will try and retain ownership of the music that I write, which then it's in my interest to actually sit and write that music, and I might, you know, I'll always try and record things properly. But if I owned it at the end of a certain term, it means that, and I can use that music for, and I mean, I had one project for HBO where I retained the rights to the music because I didn't really have very much money, but then was able to use a track for a gin commercial, which was more than the money they'd offered me to write the film, which didn't cost me anything to do because I'd already recorded it and written it properly. So there's always a creative way, or you might even say, look, I'll give you a production percentage to someone. That's another way of doing it as well. There's a back end. It gets very complicated because you want very little paperwork after it, and composers hate paperwork and we're rubbish at it.
I think it goes back full circle to your first answer, Glynn, which is start preparing early and think about it early, because your options are far wider at that stage. And that if you get to the point where you have absolutely zero budget, you're relying on a last-minute agreement with the composer. That's, to me, that's a slightly risky strategy. Yeah. We've got time for one more question, guys, so could you just wait for the microphone if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of money with Philip, and I've never regretted a penny of it. And I congratulate you on paying so little for your composers. I'm paying far. My usual fight is with the broadcasters, because I want to put more money into the budget for music, because to me it's absolutely essential element, creative element. Film is like opera to me. It needs a score. And my usual fight with Philip is he's trying to get me to take his music out of the film. There's far too much of it in, take it out. And he's probably right. The person that hasn't been mentioned in this, which I think is really, really important, is the editor. And one of the reasons really why I like working with Philip so much is he works so well with the editor. And I think you need to really get the best out of film music. The editor themselves needs to be a musical person. And in fact, editing is quite a musical thing, because it's a lot about rhythm So when you're sitting in the cutting room with the editor, I'm often talking in sort of musical terms. You know, we need to pace this up a bit, or a bit more up-tempo, or, you know, those sorts of things. And so I think the music, thinking about the music is also a process of thinking about who's going to cut the film, because in the end, actually, the editor's the most important person of all, I would say, more important than the director or the producer or anybody.
And what's your favourite use of music in a film?
The film, genuinely, this is, when I sat in it and thought I'm going to be a filmmaker, was watching Koyoni Scazzi with Philip Glass's score. And that was a film which is just, there is no dialogue, there is no story, there is no plot. There are images and there's music. Yeah. And it is sort of operatic. And it suddenly opened my eyes to what could you do without actors, with the world? How could you put images and music together and you create something new? And that's, you know, I love working with composers. It's thrilling in the film because you're together trying to put elements together to make something new. So it's never, listen to Philip, you hear this, it's not really to do with the music, and it's not to do with the pictures, it's to do with, and what you've said, you create something new out of it. So it's incredibly good fun. I mean, it's really the best fun that you have. So it's worth spending money on. And the other thing I would say about the money is the music, it can be, if it's really good, quite valuable in and of itself, which is why if the composer can retain it, you might get a score for very little. Or if you retain that, or if you share it with the composer, we've made quite a lot of money from Philip's music, which we have a deal with Philip and often we're splitting it. But, you know, it does go into commercials and stuff like that. And so
like
it's an investment, actually.
Done. Nice
so
work.
it's worth spending money on it, I would say.
So you've lots of upfront fee and lots of publishing. Nice work. Thank you very much. Those are really, really useful points. So we're going to end with one question to each of you guys, which is, for the audience here and generally, what is your one top tip on using music in film and documentaries? Starting with you, Glynn.
One tip for using music.
And if you'd like to,
Lindsay,
to answer
all I
first.
would reiterate is the point I made earlier that as much as we want to impose our will and say this is right and all of you must be wrong, I do think you have to listen to a broadcaster. I think you have to listen to what a broadcaster wants. You can amend it, you can change it, you can improve on it, but it's pointless giving them something they hate.
Okay. Philip.
Can you come back to me?
Lindsay.
I would say to use music as a director, as a sort of part of your dreaming process, you know, your creative process, to be listening all the time that you're planning sequences, planning shoots, you know, writing call sheets if that's what you're doing. Be listening to the music that's going to kind of help inspire your narrative, that's going to help create your story. I think that's a really, really, really valuable thing to do, and it will go all the way through your kind of production process, but at the same time have a producer who's very much on top of how much that's going to cost, you know, how much your dream's going to mean you have to spend, and keep those things balanced up, I'd say.
Brilliant.
I was going to say about developing relationships with editors because they are the lynch people, but that's been said very well. I think the other thing that comes off the back of that is and this is a very practical thing, is become brilliant at a running cue sheet, i.e. that you have a discipline for naming your cues, positioning them with a time code, even if your film is latched, not locked. They're all latched these days, we know that's how it works. And that you have a language that is completely transparent and is free of egos as well. You know, put it in a Dropbox, make sure whenever someone changes it, you can see what they've changed, and everyone knows where they are. And I do that with just traffic light coding, and it's great, because at no point am I thinking, what do they really think of that? Have I finished that cue? Where's that one going anyway? It's just the end of heartache, and people don't do it enough. There's a few people I work with who do it, and I love working with them because everyone knows where they are all the time.
Thank you. My top tip is know what your choices are and be informed, be educated, and then you'll make the right choices. Hopefully the guide that we hand out at the end of this will help you on that journey if you're unsure about any areas to do with clearing and choosing music. So my thanks go to our absolutely wonderful panel. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have. Glynn, Philip and Lindsay.